Hello and welcome to Insight, everyone. I'm Nnamdi Odipo, and I will be flying solo for now as my colleague Elizabeth Omori is otherwise officially engaged at the moment. This episode would explore the implementation of the new minimum wage across states in the country. We would also bring you a preview of the high-stakes governorship election in Ondo State and its implications for Nigeria's democracy. And just before we go, Elizabeth Omori will bring you a conversation on revitalizing Nigeria's reading culture and the vital role of the National Library of Nigeria. Let's get things started.
Whatever the issues are,
the National Assembly is constitutionally empowered to scrutinize,
however complex or intricate.
We have involved all the academia, the members of the academia. We have involved the academies.
Be it government policies or in fact any issue of public concern.
Our job is to help you gain clarity and make sense of it all.
This is not really healthy for our democracy.
There's a lot of aggrievance in terms of who has been in power longest and who becomes the governor of the state.
It's also in the quality of food being consumed.
After all, perception is insight.
And gaining understanding is also getting insight.
As of October 2024, the implementation of the 70,000 naira new minimum wage has been gradual across states in the country. Though some states are yet to announce the amounts they will be adopting, several states did announce plans to pay above the benchmarked 70,000 naira, like Lagos, Rivers, Ogun, and even Gombe, approving a little over 71,000 naira for workers in that northeastern states. For the few states yet to announce the amount that they will be paying their own workers, I suspect the reasons for the delay may not be far from not having come to a consensus on payment structure, or perhaps they are still considering how best to ensure consistent implementation. Let me bring in my guest, Benson Ukpa, Head of Information and Public Affairs, Nigeria Labour Congress, NLC. Comrade, welcome to the program.
It's my pleasure.
So, comrade, a number of states have already begun implementation of the minimum wage, even before the federal government commenced, paying its own 1.2 million workers, across the federation. What do you think about some of these states blazing the trail already? Is that an harbinger of good things to come? We're seeing a flip-flop with some states, but does it inspire hope, at least, that some states have already commenced payment? What are your thoughts on this, basically?
Yeah, the states that are paying, or in your own words, blazing the trail, they are deserving of a commendation. And those yet to do something should take a cue from there and do the needful. No state has any excuse not to pay. The law is already in place. All the due process was followed. All the segments of the government were represented. As federal, state, local governments, they had appropriate and adequate representation, and all the economic indices were taken into place. Even then, the 70,000 was not the appropriate figure for us at Labour.
Okay.
But we did cut a deal, and for reasons which I'll explain later. We did cut a deal and walked away with that. So all the states should be happy that it is 70,000, and they have no excuse whatsoever. Let us look at it from the perspective of capacity.
Okay, because I was just going to come to that, because I hear the unions dismissing arguments by some of these states who claim they cannot afford to pay this amount. These states, comrade, these states, they claim that due to limited financial resources, they may not be able to pay. Do you feel that argument holds any water? Some would say it runs contrary to the improved finances of the federal, state, and local governments. For instance, between June 2023 and April 2024, most states received about 200% increase in their monthly allocation compared to the amount they used to receive before fuel subsidy was removed. Does that argument of limited financial resources, does it suffice, considering that the states also have to embark on other, developmental projects to improve the lives of other citizens in the states? The state is not a composite of civil servants alone. So does the argument by these state governors hold any water?
Well, first and foremost, as I was saying earlier on, that those states absolutely have no reason, have no basis for wanting to back out, and they cannot back out. I'm going to pick on a few issues here. I will start with capacity,
okay,
which you just spoke to. In the past, they were sharing 700 billion naira monthly. That what was declared, not what was totally earned or given, but what was declared at FAC. The tiers, the 3 tiers of the administration of government were sharing about 700 billion. That has since moved to 1.1, 1.2, and climbing. But let me also tell you, besides what is routinely shared, you have other sources of interventions, geological, environmental funds. In fact, 1,001 other interventions that are made from time to time, both in crisis time and in non-crisis time. So the states have enough resources, and the states are also obliged to generate resources internally. Any state, therefore, in light of this, that still complains that they cannot pay, are certainly an extremely corrupt state, an extremely profligate state, and an extremely a state that is, that has thrown prudence to the winds. So because it's important to understand that the payment of a national minimum wage is not contingent upon surplus resources. It is contingent upon many factors, the least of which is, I will tell you, the premium that the state attaches to its workforce. You see, wage justice predates all of us here. If you take a look at the holy books,
yes,
the Holy Bible, the Holy Quran, there are ample verses that speak to wage justice. And I'm going to start with the Holy Quran here.
Okay.
First, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was quoted to have said, "The best of you is those who give the best wages to their employees."
Okay.
The Holy Quran also says, "And give full measure when you measure, and weigh with a balance that is straight." Prophet Muhammad was also quoted to have said, "Give the laborer his wages before his sweat dries."
And then
to the
the Holy
Bible and the Holy Bible. The Holy Bible says emphatically that a laborer deserves
is
his
deserving
wages.
of his wage.
And I'm going to refer you to Leviticus 19:13, Deuteronomy 24:15, Proverbs 14:23, Matthew
And we can go on
and Matthew 10:10 and Luke
Yes.
10:7. I can keep on going on. They all speak to wage justice.
Comrade, I do not even.
And I want to take you to ILO. In fact, I want to take it from the beginning that, you see, this is not just about one governor living in affluence,
Okay.
and thinking every other citizen is beneath his shoe. This is not so. There is a certain level of divinity, in quote, attached to issue of wages. Okay? And I can take you now to ILO. I want to take you to ILO. I will take you to the at the preamble of the ILO Constitution. And this is what it says. Conditions of labor exist involving such injustice, hardship, and privation to large numbers of people as to produce unrest so great that the peace and harmony of the world are imperiled, and an improvement of those conditions is urgently required. We are looking way back to 1990. Yes.
Comrade, if I allow you, I'm sure you would go from the holy books to the ILO Conventions to the charters and to the UN, everything. I'm pretty sure that will turn this program into that. And I for one, do not think, and I'm sure a lot of Nigerians would agree that yes, we do have an issue with wage justice in Nigeria, but we are where we are, and these arguments can continue, go back and forth. We've talked about you have talked about prudence, financial prudence. You've talked about being creative with IGR. We saw what play out with the 30,000 naira minimum wage. You and I were both in this country. We saw that some states implemented. We know up to when it was reviewed, we know how many states struggled with paying that. Knowing all of that, comrade, I would like to ask you, in terms of compliance now, because earlier on I referenced that yes, indeed, this is a law. Do you think the National Assembly has a critical role to play in terms of ensuring compliance? How far do you think, passing a resolution, for instance, will go? Like one directing the federal government to uphold or withhold the allocation of any state that fails to implement the minimum wage. Would that be enough?
Well, speaking directly to your question, resolutions by their nature are
advisory,
are persuasive.
Yes.
They do not have the mandatory force of law. But take note, that is not to say that a persuasive force is not strong. A persuasive force comes with the force of morality, with the force of society, okay, with the force of equity. So it might be helpful, but take note of this,
okay,
that in the extant law, there are provisions for compliance. And one of the fines for non-compliance is that it's a fine of not more than 5% of the offender's monthly wage. That is, an entity that fails to comply could be made to forfeit. That is, on conviction, is liable to forfeit not more than 5% of its monthly wage. At the second one, is that that entity is liable to pay all the withheld entitlements, salaries, arrears in appropriate form, not in a default form. That entity is also to pay an additional penalty of not less than the prevailing CBN lending rate on the wages owed.
And all of these are contained in the books.
I'm telling you.
Yes.
And
but have you seen that? Did you see that play out with the 30,000 naira?
Just a moment. Beside this, employers are mandated to keep records of employees and their wages. Any employer that fails to do this, on conviction, will be fined not more than 70,000, but then an additional 10,000 per day. These are some of the provisions in this law. Now, it is one thing to have these provisions, it's another thing to put these provisions to the test. But I want to assure you this time around,
okay, that things will be different.
Things will be different.
Okay.
Any state or any entity that fails to comply with this law will not only meet us in court, that entity will see our boots. There'll be boots
on the ground.
Yes.
I'm comrade. Yes. I know, well, like the TUC is already saying that workers can no longer survive on even this 70,000 naira, considering the current level of inflation.
Of course, the ramifications have changed.
You know,
excuse me, please. You know that since we cut this deal and walked away.
I get that.
Yes,
I get that. I was going to land on.
No, just a moment, please. I have your mandate to have the floor.
Yes, please go ahead.
So I should be allowed free and unfettered to express myself.
Please go ahead.
Fine. So since this document was signed into law, the ramifications have since changed. The main driver, which is the fuel, the pump price of of petrol, has been adjusted at least 2 times.
True.
The electricity tariff has equally been adjusted. And each time there is an adjustment, it generates currents across all the sectors and subsectors of the economy. So new triggers, new costs have come in. And as I said from the beginning, from day one, we just simply cut a deal. It wasn't that 70,000 met the need of the national minimum wage earner. So, the ramifications have since changed, and time has come for a new conversation. Thank you.
Perhaps this new conversation can also cover an issue that you and I talked about off camera just before we started. And I wonder why it is that, the organized labor does not want to have that conversation or entertain any sustained conversation on decentralized national minimum wage. Do you not think that at this point, seeing all that is playing out economically and all, that just like we know all fingers are not equal, so are the states. Is it perhaps not time to begin to canvass constitutional amendment to make provisions for decentralized national minimum wage? Mind you, comrade, proponents of this...
Just ask your question straight and I'm going to answer you.
Yes.
I don't need any elaboration. So rest your question and I'm going to answer you.
Yes, is it not time for us to have that conversation?
Well, first and foremost, such a suggestion sadly comes from ignorance of what the concept or logic of the national minimum wage. So the idea is not to prescribe a payment chart for the states is to establish that, okay, below this, no employer in the law. And the law is very, very emphatic about those affected. I'll come to that later on. So it does not force the states to pay similar salary structures. I tell you this, at the moment, states pay what they want to pay. For instance, what a director in Anambra State earns is perhaps what a chief in Benue State earns. Do you understand this?
Okay.
So the states are paying what they want to pay. All that we're saying is that let there be a threshold,
benchmark.
and there is a law. The ILO minimum wage fixing law is very clear. Nigeria signed on to this law quite early, shortly after its independence. Although Nigeria did that, it was in 79. Just a moment. It was in 79. It was in 79 that it was put in our constitution. Okay?
Yes.
And the first minimum wage act was put in place in 1981.
Okay.
And it became payable that same year, 125 naira, equivalent to $188. In today's exchange rate, 300,200 naira.
So, comrade, now I see why that argument, because you've talked about the independence and the first National Minimum Wage Act signed in 81. So when people argue that in the 1950s and the 1960s that workers in Western Nigeria, or the Western region rather, earned a lot more than federal workers, this is not the same scenario, comrade.
No, listen to me. I mean, the concept of a national minimum wage is that is the basic minimum across the country. Other entities, other regions were allowed to set their own, but their own should not be lower than that of the nation. That is the explanation.
Okay.
And that is the reason why today, in the process of having a conversation around reviewing the minimum wage, Edo State under Obaseki blazed the trail, said we are paying 70, from 30 to 35,000 or 40 to 70. We are paying 70. Whatever you eventually agree with the government or with the social partners, we also pay. And today we have quite a number of states whose minimum wages are quite above
the benchmark of
70,000. Yeah, we have Lagos paying 85, we have Akwa Ibom paying 85, we have Kebbi paying 75, all like that. In fact, quite over 12 states are paying above the national minimum wage, and that is the way it should be.
Comrade, this is a fluid situation, and we will be monitoring the trend. Unfortunately, we're completely out of time. I know you still have a lot in your kitty. I see you squad to go through the papers there, the charter, the Quran, the Bible. You've got everything. You came prepared, and I see that.
Thank you very much.
You and I would have this conversation on the latter date. We will try to fix time so that we can continue to, while we monitor the trend, as it were. We know a number of states just a couple of days ago also announced implementation of the new minimum wage. Hopefully, more and more states would embrace this law. It is a law, and then would embrace and implement this law.
And as an addition to to what you just said, you see, most economies around the country are economies driven by the wages of workers. In fact, with the exception of perhaps Lagos, all the other economies, all the state economies are driven by wage economy. So once you pay your workers very low wages, you reduce their capacity.
And morale.
In fact, their capacity. In fact, the state will keep getting poorer and poorer and poorer until it shuts down.
Comrade.
In fact, there is no record to suggest that states that acted in violation of the law had better finances than those who paid.
Comrade, we need to go now. We need to go now. My director is begging me to beg you.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Comrade Benson Ukpa, Head of Information and Public Affairs, Nigerian Labour Congress. Of course, like I did say, we would monitor the implementation of these law, and then from time to time we would intermittently bring you into the studio to give us your thoughts on how some of these states are doing. I'd like to thank you so much for coming on Insight.
It's my pleasure.